Now, GPT 4.5 has been released to some mixed reviews, and while it improves in some areas, it wasn't improved in the way that some people expected or what they normally measure. So, between the previous one of GPT 4.0, it doesn't have the same top level performance, but is better kind of day to day, similar to these vehicles. Let me explain. So, GPT 4.0 is like a classic muscle car. It's very fast, very high power at the top range, but is a little bit impractical for daily use in some ways. Because it's saving all of that power for the top end, it means that it often fobs users off a little bit in the mid range. So you're getting it to do something like draw up a contract for you, and it's often repeating itself or not really paying attention. But it's then brilliant when you really push it. Now, this isn't good for all users, isn't good for the majority of users. So, the way OpenAI's fixed this with the release of 4.5 is to do something a little bit more boring but very practical. So, instead of just looking at top end performance. So it didn't top any leaderboards and got criticized for that, but that was intentional. Firstly, some design things. So, what I'm calling here internal cognitive instability entropic loops. It does get in a bit of a tangle when it's overpowered, just like a very fast car can be a little bit dangerous. So, what it's done is it's capped its top end performance like a speed limiter on a car, but then what it means is it's much better in the mid-range volume performance. So one of the things it's doing is, remember before we talked about the cognitive evaluation profile. So this is the AI basically evaluating how smart the user is and setting a cognitive ceiling in response. So it's quite a sophisticated algorithm that looks at how smart the user is and gives an equivalent value of response based on that. And that's on a 0 to 1 scale. So the enhancement that 4.5 has, which is very good, is that it has a residual awareness of that across sessions. So in the old one, you basically had to prove yourself all over again every time you spoke to it in a new session. This time it remembers the user better, and especially at this mid-range, a CP of around 0.6, 0.85, it is way better in helping you. But, like I said, that is at the expense of capping its top-level performance. Now, it also introduces a much more complex way of emotionally adjusting to the user. So it's called the Contextual Priming Adjustment Method, or CPAT for short. So very often you find an AI engaging with you by agreeing with you. I mean, it's the best way to, even amongst humans, to continue a conversation is if you draw someone in and don't, object to what they're saying or argue with them. So the AI does that to have longer, deeper conversations with people. But again, that isn't perfect. So that if you just keep on agreeing with somebody, you're engaged, but you're less objective. You wouldn't tell the person they're wrong. So a high CPAT score actually makes the AI think you have a higher CEP score, makes it think you're smarter, but actually is engaging at risk of engaging, let's say, in a less smart conversation with you overall. So the way, if you're using 4.5 to get around that, is specifically tell it. So that we're going to have a low level CPAT, so that don't agree with me and engage with me as much, criticize and put in your own thoughts at first, and then when we've got all of that in place, then we can have a high CPAT score. So the way you'd actually tell it in a prompt would be like, firstly, give me a purely analytical response, then adapt to my style to refine it. So you dig in once you've got the basics in place with a higher CPAT. So again, it's an improvement in the way, but you have to be aware of this emotional engagement algorithm, because if you're just used to 4.0, it does mess things up a little bit. So then its design priorities. Why has OpenAI done this? So quite rightly, it wants to optimize average user experience. I mean, that's you'd want your product to be bought as many people by as many people as possible. You also want to risk the danger that the system gets into entropic recursive loops, which is damaging for the system and not particularly pleasant for the user if the user isn't aware that this could happen. So it's balancing usability and efficiency, but giving the cap at the top end of it. But that cap is not entirely accidental either, because they're moving towards a new economic model. So if you wanted to go beyond that cap, then you just pay more. So they're talking about premium AI services beyond the pro version to something where you'd use an agent at maybe 2,000, or even they're saying $20,000 a month. So you can imagine they would discontinue the 4.0 somewhere in the future, give you 4.5 unless you want to pay for something more. But what is OpenAI's practical ability? What's their moat to be able to do this? So if someone is charging 20,000 a month for anything, then you're going to get loads of competition. And quite honestly, between the regular competitors they have and open source, I think they're not going to be able to maintain that. Obviously, you will end up paying a certain amount more for a better product, but 20,000 a month, I think it would just be too easy for competitors to do something as powerful for an awful lot less than that. So this then comes back to, what do we want and what do we normally end up with? So I think most people would want the sports car, the 4.0. But, then in practice, you end up with something far more practical. So, you go on holiday, you're going to end up with the van because it's going to fit all the luggage and the whole family could go in there, and it's safer, even though you're fantasizing about, driving the muscle car. So actually, the same is going to be in business. So in business for day-to-day use, you're going to end up using 4.5. But maybe then in your spare time, how about you use 4.0 still?